Well, today I was able to fly this Wind Warrior kite. Before I tell you my experience with it, I want to tell you that I have no affiliation at all with the Wind Warrior company, any of its people, or anything. They did send me this kite to evaluate and report on, but I get no compensation. I don't want any compensation. That's not why I do this. I make these videos because I love fighter kite flying, and I love making them. But it's very rare that there is a commercial fighter kite available, and often people ask me where I can buy one, and I don't really know where to send them. So when a kite like this Wind Warrior shows up and is a commercially available kite, I want to share that information with people to help me, I guess, really promote fighter kiting, and that if someone wants to buy a kite instead of making it, a lot of people don't have an interest in making the kite. I don't have any problem with that, but they don't have many choices for purchasing. So when this came up, I thought, boy, this would be nice for me to tell people about it so that they could decide for themselves whether they had an interest in buying one and learning to fly fighter kites. So the recommended wind speed for this kite is 10 to 20 miles per hour. I live in Arizona, southern Arizona, south of Tucson, and we do not get 15-mile-an-hour winds very often. If we do, they're usually coupled with tornado-like violence and rain. And during the summer, especially, like right now, towards the end of July, that's what we get almost every late afternoon. Today, I noticed that the trees were starting to move a little bit before the storm clouds actually rolled in. So I packed up my kite and headed to the local park. And I measured on my wind gauge, a handheld wind gauge that I carry, and it was 3 to 7 miles per hour is what it showed on the gauge, variable wind. And I thought, well, that's probably good enough. So I tried to fly the kite. I was unsuccessful. I could get it airborne, yes, when and if I were to pull on the flying line really hard consistently, it would fly. But I had no control of it really, and when I released the line tension, the kite sort of just kind of wandered to the ground. Before I went to the flying field though, because I knew I wouldn't have 20-mile-an-hour winds, or 15, I made an alternate bow. The bow that comes with this kite, and the one I used initially, is made of 0.125 inch diameter carbon fiber. Very, very stiff. I made an alternate bow from a slightly smaller diameter carbon fiber, 0.095 inches in diameter is what this bow is. So while I was at the park, I changed the bow and put this one in. When I did that, the kite flew because the sail was able to deflect and change shape easily enough with that 7-mile-an-hour maximum wind speed. And the kite flew quite nicely, really. it pulled like a truck on my flying line. And I used the flying line that I'm familiar with using, which is a braided Spectra 50-pound test fishing line. Now, that line is relatively slippery, but I'm quite used to using it. So that's what I used. But in most of my flying time, I've never flown a kite of this size. I've only done it once before, and that was years and years and years ago. But it surprised me how much pull there was on my flying line and how much pressure and finger and hand strength was required to actually manage the line and be able to fly the kite and do different maneuvers and what have you. But once I did that, it flew quite nicely. One of the things that often people do is to change the position of the toe point, move it towards the nose a little bit to reduce the amount of pressure on the kite. So I did that. And it did release a little bit of the pulling pressure, but not a lot. However, it did change the way the kite flew. And for me, I prefer to have a stronger pull and a little, what I consider better performance of the kite than to have a slightly lower pressure of pulling and not quite the same amount of control over the kite. That's my personal preference. That's all that is. Some people may prefer to have it the other way all the time. But overall, I want to say that the kite flew. I also grounded it and attempted to launch it from the ground, like I normally do my other kites. Well, today the wind had really a pretty strong downdraft near the ground, and it was challenging to get it to actually relaunch, but I did successfully do it a couple of times, and I think that if there wasn't a lot of downdraft pressure of the wind at the ground level, this kite would relaunch quite easily. And in terms of its flight, it was unbelievably slow, beautifully slow, really, beautifully slow. And from a beginner perspective, or a new fighter kite flyer just getting used to how the kites fly and how to control them, this kite's speed is absolutely perfect. The amount of pull on the flying line may not really appeal to every new flyer though, because they may not have the hand and finger strength to actually grip the line enough to control the kite. That would be something that only they would know, of course, but it's a possibility that came to mind while I was flying it. Now, I think that the kite will, with this more flexible bow, and it will fly in winds that are probably 6 to 10 miles an hour and fly quite well when you want a kite that is strong pulling, slow moving, and allows for very deliberate maneuvers of the line in order to control it, because you have so much time. You don't have the pressure that a faster kite creates for making decisions about what to do next. Now, the owner of Wind Warrior, when he sent me the kite, we have emailed a few times, and one of the things he told me was he is planning to include in the kite purchase a fiberglass bow along with the carbon fiber bow that he supplies. Now, the fiberglass bow is probably very similar in flexibility to my smaller diameter carbon that I use today. I haven't tried the fiberglass, but my guess is, from my experience, that it probably is pretty close to what this is. And if that's the case, then this kite might be an awful lot of fun for a lot of people, and with a more flexible bow would allow it to fly in much more mild wind conditions that are more often available for people to fly kites, and more enjoyable to fly in, really. So that's my take on the Wind Warrior kite. It's really a nice kite. It's nicely built, very nicely constructed, and very large, very slow, and all of those things might be really just the ticket for some people. And if so, it'd be a great purchase. It's a fabulous value, I think, at $50. Just looking at the amount of materials that are included in the kite, the $50 is pretty obvious that the kite itself costs quite a bit to make. So I hope this helps you in your decision on what to do about buying a fighter kite.